Welcome back to Floss Law. All right, we're back with video number 4. We missed a day. We're on 10 days for the next 10 years of your life. 10 days to devote towards talking about becoming a real estate investor for the next 10 years of your life, so that in the next decade, you're already going to have investment real estate and be in a much better position. We missed yesterday. I got kind of busy with family stuff, so we're going to do a double header today. So we're going to catch up. We're going to do video number 4 and 5 today. When you're watching this video, I'm probably going to be doing the recording for video number 5, so stick around. By the time you finish this one, the next one's probably going to be almost uploaded. So we're going to do these back to back. It should be pretty easy because I'm hitting on two videos, but they're more or less kind of the same topic. First, this video you're watching right now, we're going to talk about evaluating 2 to 4 unit buildings. So 2 flats, 3 flats, 4 flats. If you live on the East Coast, you call them, duplex, triplex, all that. And then after that, the next video right after this is going to be doing multifamily. Multifamily is 5 units and up. Typically, you're looking at, we don't get many 5-unit buildings. Typically, they go in kind of even numbers. So you'll get a 6-unit and 8-unit. Then it kind of jumps up to 12. Then you end up with like 18. And just because of the tiers and the way it's situated. So that'll be the next video. This one, we're going to talk about 2 to 4 unit buildings. Before we get there, thanks for coming back. Again, if you're watching this on YouTube, if you could please hit the thumbs up. It helps a lot. Hit subscribe. And then if you have any questions, you have any comments, please comment below. If you're watching this on any of the other avenues, if you're watching this on Facebook, LinkedIn, whatever, same thing. Thumbs up, comment, anything. It really helps. It goes a long way to know that you guys appreciate these videos. And then if you want to keep following along, you can follow the Floss Law page on Facebook, or you can find me on the YouTube page, and then you can subscribe to the video so you'll get updates when I'm uploading these. We're going to keep this going. Sort of my resolution for the new year is a commitment to doing these videos. I get a lot of great comments from you guys about watching the old ones, so I really want to keep this going and keep doing it. I get really great feedback from all of you. So if you're enjoying these, let me know, because it helps me know that people are getting great value out of it. So getting back to today's topic. First, so we're gonna, so that you know for the rest of the week what the plan is. So we're going through till Friday. Saturday, the 11th day, I'll be at the U.S. Bank Multifamily Investor Summit at University of Chicago. I'm really excited about it. We're all getting everything finalized for it, and it's looking like it's going to be a great event. For the rest of this week, so we're doing 2 to 4 today. We're doing multifamily right after. Tomorrow, I'm planning on doing just a whole video talking about property inspections. We're going to talk a little bit about inspections today, but you as an investor, I want to go over things you need to know when you're doing an inspection of an investment property, because it is different than doing an inspection for like your single family house. We're going to do that. Tuesday, we're going to talk about hard money lending. Big issue. I get a lot of questions about that. People don't really understand what a hard money lender is, what that means, what it entails. I love hard money lending, but there are very specific things you need to know about hard money lending before you take that dive. We're going to talk about that. Then Wednesday, we're going to talk about private money and private investors. Also, one of the top questions that I get, a lot of misconceptions about it, as far as how to find a private investor, how to do that, how to set that deal up, how to pitch people, do that. So that's going to be Wednesday. So if you're interested, I know that's always a really popular topic. Come back Wednesday, we'll have that video up. Thursday, we're going to talk about JV. I throw that word around a lot. I had someone ask me the other day, they're like, what's JV again? Joint venture. So joint venture agreement, or for lack of a better term, a partnership. How we put those together, what that looks like when you are going into an investment property. You don't want to go in alone. You have someone else that maybe has some cash they want to put into the property. How we set that up. I do that like every day in the office. So that should be a really long video. It'll be an easy one for me to do because it's like what I spend all day talking about to people. And then the last video, because the hot topic right now in Chicago and the hot topic at the multifamily summit this year is going to be the legalization of recreational marijuana in Illinois, what that effect is on real estate. And that's going to tie directly into the summit, because we're going to do a couple panels on Saturday talking about the legalization of recreational marijuana, what you need to know as a real estate agent, what you need to know as a property manager, what you need to know as a landlord. We're going to hit a lot of those topics, some of my opinions about what you should do as a landlord, and then we'll do a deep dive. We'll do a big panel on Saturday so that you can get a lot of different people's opinions. My opinion is probably going to differ from some other people about what I think you should do as a property owner, what I think is realistic, and it'll be fun. It's going to be interesting. So, all right. So let's get back to today's topic. So you want to buy a 2 to 4 unit building. That's very common. We get, occasionally we'll get, because we have so many condos, and we get a lot of cheap condos in Chicago, we do get a lot of investors that their first 1 or 2 properties, they'll either go with a really cheap condo or they'll go with a really cheap single family home and rent it out as their first investment. That's common. We still get a lot of people, though, that really want to do like a 2 to 4 unit building as their first investment. And it's become, I would say in the last year to 2 years, it's become incredibly popular. I would say the number of people who I have had personally buy investment condos has gone way down as their first investment, and more people are going for a 2 flat as their first investment. Part of the reason for that is, and I won't get into the whole thing now, but a lot of the condo laws in Chicago have gotten a little funky, and we have, kind of the combination of the rental laws and the condo laws has kind of scared some investors away from doing that. I still like them if you don't really have time for management, because you're kind of relying on the HOA to do a lot of the maintenance for the building for you. But we've seen 2 to 4 unit investments shoot up because owner occupied 2 flats and 3 flats have been very prominent on the market. I would say for the last 2 years, and the last year especially, I've been getting an unbelievable number of people doing owner occupied. So what that means is, what we're talking about is you as a buyer, and typically we get this with younger individuals. I think I talked about it was either the last video, 2 videos ago. It's very popular, obviously, with usually you're single, or maybe you're married and you don't have kids yet, and you buy like a 2 or 3 flat, and you could get FHA financing for it. So instead of needing, typically when you buy a commercial property, you're going to need about 30% down, 25 to 30% down. When you're doing an FHA purchase, you only need 3.5% down. And then if you're really savvy with it, you can negotiate with the seller and give them a higher price, but they can give you as a seller credit towards that 3.5%. FHA allows you to do that. So you could go to a 2 flat and give the seller an offer that essentially is close to or even at full price, and say, look, I'm going to give you your asking price, but instead of me negotiating the price down, so let's give you numbers so you know what you're dealing with here. So if you're looking at a 2 flat and the asking price is $400,000, and you're thinking, well, I could give them an offer of $375. Instead of giving them an offer of $375, you could say, look, I'm going to give you 4, but I want you to kick in 3% closing costs towards my down payment at the closing. You can do that. So then you're only coming with, 0.5, or you can even tell them to give you the whole 3.5% down payment. You could do stuff like that. We do that a lot. A lot of the savvy realtors do that kind of stuff. They coach their buyers on, look, we can lower your down payment even more, and basically the seller is giving you your down payment. It's fantastic. So we get a lot of that. So you could do that. You buy that income property. You have to live in it. You got to move into the property. You have to live in it for at least about a year. And after a year, FHA will let you do it again. So after that year's up, you can turn around and buy another building doing that. We get people that do that year after year after year, accumulating these 2, 3 flat buildings. By the time they're done with it, now they have all these buildings, they have stabilized mortgages on them, and they just have to collect the rent on them. So it's a great tool to use for wealth building. And some people just do one building and they're like, I don't want to buy any more. I just want to keep the one building, which is totally fine too. But it's a great avenue if you're young. If you're watching this video, you're young, you're either single or married, you don't have kids yet. It's a fantastic vehicle to look into. I encourage it because I think it's one of the best things out there. It's one of the lowest entry point, best ways to get into investment that exists today, that you should be taking advantage of. So that's why I keep emphasizing it over and over again, because I want every young person watching this to look into it and see if it's something that you want to do. Now, I realize it's not realistic for everyone, because maybe you're watching this and you have 3 kids and you're thinking, I'm not going to move, my whole family into, the first floor of a 3-flat building. It's not realistic for us. Interestingly enough, that was really the intention for a lot of those buildings. So a lot of 2 flats and 3 flats were built. And if you talk to like your grandparents or parents, depending on how old you are watching this video, a lot of those buildings were intended to be owner occupied. So people would buy those buildings and it would be, like the family building. So when the kids got old enough, the tenant would move out of the 2nd floor, and then, the oldest kid would get unit 2. And then when the next kid got old enough, they would kick out the tenant on floor 3. And then, the next oldest kid got floor 3. So, that was how people sort of helped out their family, years and years ago. It was not uncommon for, a family to own, and then like the aunts and uncles and everything would own these income properties on the same block or around the corner from each other. And, the kids would, when they got old enough, would just get the floor upstairs. They would just get the unit upstairs. That was how people, were able to save money and, help them get, established and do things like that. And at some point we kind of lost that. People didn't want to do that anymore. There was an expectation that everyone was supposed to buy a house, and, it was the American dream. Everyone was supposed to go buy a house. But that was a great avenue for people for a really long time to help their family sort of get established. And I think there's really, when we're making all these arguments about affordable housing and what are we going to do and how we're going to help these kids that are getting out of college with no student loans, that could be something that we might go back to, that we might have to kind of come back around to where we started, and we might have to look at families thinking about long term buying these multi-unit properties so that their kids can live in the other unit, and it gives them a chance to get a foothold where they're not paying astronomical prices for either trying to buy a property or rent out a property, and the family helping each other. So I'm kind of looking at that as maybe maybe we're going to see that make a resurgence. I haven't seen that yet, but it could be something down the line when we have so many owner occupiers buying these 2 and 3 flats. Maybe down the road they'll think, well, hey, we already have this income property. Maybe we'll wait until the kids get older and then they can move into this one, or we'll give them that building, or whatever the case may be. As time goes on, it's only going to get more important to think about not only wealth building for yourself, but for your family. And that was the original intention for those buildings. So maybe we're going to end up going full circle and go back to where it all began, and going back to families owning these buildings instead of just investors owning them. All right, so if you're an investor watching it, you're thinking, Bob, this doesn't help me at all. I got it. So if you're an investor looking at these properties, a couple different things you need to know when you're dealing with the 2 to 4 unit building. Obviously, you're dealing with, the attractiveness is you're getting a multi-unit building, so you have multiple streams of income, you have multiple tenants in there. But when you're looking at a 2 to 4 unit building as opposed to making the jump up to an 8-unit multifamily building, there's a couple things you need to know. Number one is you only have a couple tenants in there. So, it sounds pretty basic to say, but it's something I think gets glossed over very quickly. And I want you to take a moment to take a step back and think about this logically. If you're buying a 2-unit building, if you're buying a 3-unit building, so you have 2 tenants, you have 3 tenants, whatever the number may be, you need to have excellent tenant screening. Because if you fail to screen your tenants properly and you just throw people in the building, when you're looking at like a 2-unit building, If one of those tenants stops paying rent, or you have to evict them or do something like that, there's generally not a huge margin on like a 2 or 3 unit building. It's a great investment. They usually make a steady amount of income. You're not going to get rich off of 1 2 flat. You can usually what happens with the 2 flat is short term, you have very good income. You have your money parked in a stable investment. You get kind of a stable amount of income off the property every year. But you're not going to get like a crazy amount of money. You might get a profit of $10,000, $20,000, $30,000 a year off of a 2 or 3 flat. It's not a huge amount of money, but it's a good investment. Part of it is when you have a building like that, it's an appreciating asset. So instead of you have a depreciating asset like your car or something like that, the building's going to be an appreciating asset. Over time, rents are always going to go up. Property values, typically, unless we have a crash, is always going to go up. So at that point, you're building equity in the property. You're paying down the mortgage. The value of the property is going up. You can push up rents. The value of the property goes up more. So a lot of times we deal with people who have a 2 flat, and 10 years later they go back and realize that the building's worth way more than what they paid for it, and they can either sell it or they can go in and refi, and then they can pull like 50, 100 grand out, and they can use it for something else, use it for another property, do whatever. So it's a really good asset. It's a good thing to have. But you have to make sure that the tenants are paying rent. That goes for any income property, but when you're dealing with a building that's small, if you get one tenant not paying rent, especially if you have like a 2 flat, if one tenant doesn't pay rent, you're barely breaking even on the building, and in fact you might be negative on it. You really need both units paying to get that profit. Once one stops, your profit goes right down, and you're barely breaking even or barely paying the mortgage off on the property, and you might be out of pocket for like the utility or the maintenance at the property or something like that. So it's so important that you have outstanding credit screening. You need to be have some sort of website or something that you can go to where you can get a full background check. You need their credit score. You probably want to do a criminal background check. You want to do everything. You want to vet these people carefully, because it's so crucial to the success of these small buildings that you have good long-term tenants in there. I've seen someone let a bad tenant into a property, and just them leaving the property and trashing the unit, and now you need to go in and send a contractor in to do work to that unit so that you can re-rent it. That alone may potentially kill your profit for almost the entire year for that building. So you need to make sure that every person you let into that building needs to be properly vetted, and you've checked everything and make sure that they're going to take good care of your property. Otherwise, you're just you still have the appreciating asset portion of the building, so there's still a positive there. But as far as that short term, the year over year rental income, if you don't do these buildings right, you're just breaking even on all of them. Now, some people, I know some investors that just buy a whole ton of them, and if they make a profit, great. If they break even, they don't really care, but they just like the aspect of that those buildings are always kind of appreciating, or they can just put a bunch of money into them, rehab them, and then they're worth more money. But as you, as the small investor, most people probably watching this, you need to streamline as much as possible every tenant you're putting in these properties. The second thing that's really important is the expenses for these buildings. So you can let the expenses get out of control with 2 and 4 flats. When you're dealing with a couple tenants in the building, when you do like the HOA, or I should say, when you do the condo, you're paying the HOA. The HOA is really maintaining the property for you, so you don't have to really do a whole lot. You just got to make sure the tenant's happy, and maybe you got to replace a faucet or something once in a while. When you're doing a house, you rent out the house. A lot of times when we do single family house leases, we really put it on the tenant to do the maintenance of the property. So we'll tell the tenant that, it's your responsibility to mow the lawn or shovel the driveway because it's a house. You got to maintain the house. You're going to rent it. You got to take care of it. So you can kind of defer some of the maintenance that way. Obviously if something breaks in the house, you still got to pay someone to go take care of it. When you're dealing with a 2 to 4 flat, it's all on you. You got to take care of everything. So sometimes people struggle a little bit when they make that jump. You got to make sure you have someone needs to be available for 24-hour-a-day phone calls. If an emergency comes up, a pipe burst, you got to take care of it. 2 to 4 unit buildings typically take a lot more wear and tear than say like a condo or a house would. People kind of beat up these 2 and 4 flats. They really they take a beating, and they take a lot of maintenance to keep them up and running really well. You have common areas. So in the 2 to 4 units, you have usually like a vestibule. You might have a common area. You have to maintain that. So now you have janitorial expenses. You need to make sure it's well taken care of. The people aren't trashing it. You got to worry about lawn care. You got to worry about, depending on your climate, snow, doing that type of thing. Typically, you have depending on the size and with the location of the building, you may or may not have a dumpster. You got to worry about trash. There's a lot of different factors with it. All those things add up for expenses on those properties, and you need to try to keep those expenses as low as possible. Remember, the value of an income property is the rent coming in minus your expenses, then you get your net. Your net is the multiplier you use for determining the appraised value of the property. So you can either raise rents from a building. There's 2 different ways you can create value with an income property. You can raise rents from the building, or you can find inefficiencies in the expenses and lower the expenses, thereby increasing the net, thereby increasing the value of the property. I was looking at a building with a gentleman yesterday. He's looking at a building. Now this is a multifamily, but it still pertains to this. So he's looking at a multifamily. It's intended to be condos. Well, they didn't sell any of the condos, so they're selling all the condos in a batch, the whole building as an apartment building. It's being sold as a multifamily asset now. So it's a failed condo development, which I actually like, because usually a failed condo development means they put very high-end finishes in it. When you're dealing with an apartment building, people try to get by with minimal finishes. When you're trying to sell a condo, they're going to put more high-end finishes in there. So when we get a failed condo development, we know that they did the units really nice, which you as an investor means you get higher rent for it, and typically means that they did more work. So it should need, there's going to be less capital expenditures on the building down the road, which is good as well. But when we were looking at the expenses for the building, it popped out at me that with 2 things. One, their vacancy rate, because it's a newer building, they had the vacancy rate way too low. So I said, all right, we're going to have to bump up the expenses because their vacancy rate's not realistic. But then I noticed that they still had on there the HOA expenses. So it was a failed condo. They had set up the condo for the building. They had set up the HOA for the building, but they still had on the itemized expenses for the multifamily the cost for all the individual units to pay the HOA on top of all the other expenses for the building. So you had the expenses for the building, and you still had them paying an HOA. It didn't make any sense. It was redundant. So I realized we can eliminate the HOA expenses, and everything else was still going to be the same. Well, by doing that, that creates a ton of value in the building. So now you've eliminated a whole line amount of expenses. That just shoots up the value of the building. So then it becomes more attractive, much more attractive. Same thing with a 2 to 4 unit building. You're trying to find inefficiencies. You might look at a building and look at the management expenses and go, okay, well, I'm going to self-manage. This is around, down the street from me. And if you're going to self-manage, make sure it has to be in a close vicinity. It's far away from you. It makes it too difficult. But if it's in a close vicinity to you, and you're going to self-manage, obviously that's going to eliminate a huge expense off of there, and that's going to drive up the value of the building for you. And sometimes we find inefficiencies with things. In the city of Chicago, you can be on a water meter, but we still get buildings that in particular areas that they don't have a water meter on there for whatever reason. They're an older building. They didn't used to do water meters. It's in a lot of areas and a lot of pockets that we deal with. So they do an estimated bill. So they estimate what the anticipated water usage should be for your building, and twice a year you get this estimated water bill. Well, that sounds great. So if you're running the water constantly, it works out actually pretty well for you. But if you get a vacancy, you're basically paying water for water that you're not using, because they're not measuring how much water you're actually using. They're anticipating it, they're estimating it, and then they give you your water bill. If you didn't use the water, that's not their problem. You still have to pay the bill. So the first thing I usually do is say get the water meter on there, because if your building ends up sitting empty for any period of time, you're paying water for water that you're not using. Unfortunately, sometimes I get clients that don't realize that until like after they've completed a gut rehab and the building's been empty for a year, and they don't realize they've been paying thousands of dollars for a water bill for water they're not using. So you need to look at your expenses. If you can look at those expenses carefully and realize that there's something missing from there, and it goes both ways. Sometimes stuff is missing from there too. So you need to really go through these income and expense sheets. But the best thing is when we go through these income and expense sheets, when I'm sitting down with the client, they got under contract, and we look at everything and we find numbers that are wrong or inefficiencies or whatever, where we know, all right, well, there's this $2,000 thing that I know we can just knock that off. That's amazing, because anytime you do that, you're shooting up the value of the building and you're creating equity. There's a lot of investors that never rehab buildings. All they do is they find properties and they find ways to solve expense and management inefficiencies. It's a skill set that gets overlooked. It takes experience to learn that, but it's how a lot of big investors are thinking, how are they creating so much value in these properties? They bought it for this much, and then 2 months later they're saying it's worth that much. I don't understand how that's possible, because they know how to go in and cut down expenses. Same thing like at the corporate level, they go in, they figure out how to cut out expenses. There's people who do that with rental properties. They can go in, they can figure out, I can cut this, I can cut this, I can cut this utility bill down by doing this, I can switch this over by doing that, and they just trim everything down. Every time you're increasing the net for a building, you're shooting that value up. So you're going to need to develop that skill. Same thing, like if you don't have the value coming in, if you don't have a tenant paying rent, same thing for the expenses on a 2-unit. Every expense counts, and you really need to go through and cut it down as much as possible to increase that net, because there really isn't a huge margin on these buildings. So you need to be very, very aware of each expense that you're paying for on a property. Then the other thing was, so I did the tenant screening. Sorry, I have my notes here. Crucial to keep the management down. Obviously, that's another thing too. If you're going to own or occupy these 2 and 3 flats, I don't say 4 flat because we don't get many 4 flats. There's a few of them, but not many. Usually in Chicago, we have a ton of 2 and 3 flats, not many 4s. If you're going to own or occupy, obviously that's going to make a huge difference too. So it's kind of funny. It kind of plays with the income and expenses a little bit. So you're going to have less income coming in because you're living in one of the units on the property, but you're also going to be able to cut down the expenses drastically because you don't need a management company. You're going to be there, so you can take care of it yourself. So a lot of times when you do this owner occupied, you can just about break even because the income's down, but you can drastically decrease those expenses too. So if you do it right, sometimes you have to pay a little bit out of pocket, but I also get clients that are breaking even or even pulling a profit if they do it right. Usually the ones that pull a profit are the ones that are willing to live in the smallest unit in the building. So it's a little counterintuitive. A lot of times people who own or occupy want to live in the biggest unit in the building. But I get clients sometimes who are like, I just wanted, this is an investment for me. So, I'm only going to live in here for a year or 2 years. That's the plan. So for right now, I'm going to live in the tiniest one. So I get the most rental income. So I'm making a profit. And then, a year or 2 years of your life goes by in a blink of an eye. So it doesn't matter. Oh, I was going to touch on inspections. So we're going to do a whole video later on the week on property inspections, but I want to touch a little bit. So doing an inspection on these buildings is going to be different than when you are doing like a condo or a house or something like that. So when you're doing a condo or a house, you're going to live in it, and certainly when you're doing owner occupied with these buildings, it's going to be different. You're going to want to go through. You're going to make sure all the the fixtures are working, nothing's leaking. The inspector's going to go through it with a fine-tooth comb. They're going to make sure everything's perfect. When you're looking at a building as an investor, investment only, you're not going to be living there, the inspection process is a little different. You don't really, I found that investors really don't care as much about individual little things, like if there's an old faucet or something like that, or if there's an older, doesn't have stainless steel appliances as older appliances, they don't care as long as they're working. As long as they know everything's working, they don't really care. They might want to spruce up some things to push up the rent, but depending on your neighborhood, they might be okay with the way things are, the way things are in the unit. They don't care that everything isn't updated all the way. Versus when you're an investor, you're going to be much more strict on making sure you find out about any potential capital expenditures on the building. Capital expenditures means, I guess the easiest way to explain it would be the big ticket items on the property. So when you're buying a house, the inspector's usually like, yeah, the roof looks okay. I think the roof will be fine. When you do an investment property, I want to know that roof is solid. A lot of times inspectors on a house will have either a drone or they'll look at the roof and go, yeah, I think this roof looks okay. If I'm doing an income property, if I'm doing like a 2 or 3 flat, I want the inspector up on the roof. I need to know, because remember, this is for an investment, and doing a roof is a big ticket item. This is supposed to be a profitable thing. If you got to do a roof tear off on a 2 flat, that's your profit for the year. It could be gone right there. That's it. So there's no room for error on that. So, sometimes the inspectors are saying, well, I don't really want to get up on the roof. Look, I need you on the roof. I need to know if there's a problem up there or not. I can't assume that. That's my 2020 profit on that roof. I need you to get up there and take a look and let me know if it looks okay or if it doesn't, and I need a credit from the seller for that. Same thing, a lot of income property. Again, in Chicago, you're gonna get some buildings that still have the old boiler. So you'll have boiler buildings; those are fine. The issue we run into is if we have the super old boiler, we call it an octopus. The one that just is like this big contraption with all the vents going everywhere. I've not exaggerating. I've walked into buildings and they have the super old boiler that has probably been there since World War II. I mean, and the thing's still running. God bless whoever, the guy who's servicing that thing is keeping that thing going. But that's A, it's old, and B, that thing, those old utilities like that take a ton of energy to run those things. It's not terribly uncommon for an investor to go in and rip out a boiler. Now, obviously, it's expensive to put a new boiler in, but if you take the time and the expense to put the new boiler in, it's going to cut down your utility costs sometimes in half, sometimes more, because it's so expensive to run those. Same argument we make sometimes for the appliances. If you have a really old refrigerator in the units, you don't want to spend the money to buy a new refrigerator. But if you replace a refrigerator, sometimes it can cause a swing in your electric bill of $10, $15, $20 a month, because older refrigerators, take a lot more electricity. They take a lot more to run versus the newer ones that are much more efficient. So when you're talking about those are capital expenditures. When you're talking about spending money on the property, but a lot of times when you're doing that, you're lowering your expenses on the property. And again, remember, every time we lower an expense on the property, so you're out of pocket for 2020, maybe you're going to break even for 2020 because you're spending money on new hot water heaters, you put a new boiler in, something like that. But the counter is, in 2021, you're going to be making even more profit on the building and creating a lot more equity in the property for yourself, because you've now lowered all of your expenses. Now your gas bill is going to be cut in half. Now your electric bill is going to be reduced by 20-30%. It's all going into cutting down those expenses and creating more profitability. Part of knowing how to do that is doing your inspection properly. So you need to know what age is that boiler? Is the boiler working? Is it not working? How old do we think those hot water heaters on? I'm personally a big fan of going in and replacing hot water heaters, because when a hot water heater gets old and they burst, it causes a lot of damage. Once water gets loose in a building, you've lost all control. Water can cause so much damage. So I personally like to replace hot water heaters pretty aggressively, versus how much they cost versus how much damage they can cause. I think it's in your best interest to keep replacing them. That's just my personal opinion. So what the roof's always a big deal, because we get a lot of inspectors that don't want to go up on the roof, and it's like that's important. That's really important for the investor. Versus, we need to know those things. How do the windows look? A lot of inspectors aren't willing to go on a limb as far as if a porch looks good or not. In Chicago, we have very strict rules on porches. If the city comes by and says that they don't like the way a porch was done, they'll make you rip it down and redo it, which is extremely expensive. But you want the inspector focused on those things. You don't really care if the inspector is going through and, you need a new GFCI outlet over here, and he's checking the caulk around the tub. It doesn't matter. I mean, if you're just looking at an investment property, you're kind of wasting your time on that. Rental properties are always going to need work done to the units anyway. You're always going to be tweaking that stuff and replacing little things and doing stuff like that. So I'm not really trying to go through the individual units with a fine-tooth comb. You just go through the units. Does everything look okay? Yeah. Is anything leaking? No. What are the conditions of the appliances and stuff like that? They're okay. Is there laundry in the unit? Maybe not. You want to see what's going on with the laundry. But outside of that, you're not like arguing that the walls have a smudge on them or something like that. You don't really care about that kind of stuff. So it's not uncommon for, and sometimes I'm with investors when they go through a building, just to talk to them about other things. The inspector will spend all their time really on the outside of the building, checking the roof, checking tuck pointing, checking the lintels above the windows. That's a big thing in Chicago. If you get caught with the rusty lintel, that can get really expensive. So you want to make sure the lintels are good, the windows are good. Go in, check the common area, almost the boiler, all that kind of stuff, and spend all their time on that, and really just kind of zip through the units in 2 minutes. They're just running through. Are there any holes in the wall? How's the appliances look? Anything else? Is there any water damage on the ceiling or near the windows? No, we don't see anything there. Okay, looks good. Next unit, and zip out. Just take a bunch of pictures, make sure everything looks good. So it's a different mindset when you're doing that. Even more so when you do the multifamily. When we jump up to multifamily in the next video, you have to make sure you get into every unit, and that's important. It's much more important in multifamily, but still relevant here. Never, ever, 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 ever buy a property without getting into every single unit. That sounds easy. It's not easy, and you'd be surprised how commonly investors sort of get talked into, oh, well, that unit looks like all the other units, so it's not a big deal. Really sorry the tenant isn't answering the phone or letting us in, but they're all the same quality. Usually it's not the case, and I've had a lot of problems with that. So I've had a lot of investors come to me and say, hey, I bought this building. Why didn't you use me? I don't know. You're cheap, and this is why you're in this issue now. They hurried up and bought a property, and they said, oh, we got through 3 and the other 5 are fine. We'll do that in the next video, but you get the idea. Make sure you're getting in every single unit. Don't ever buy a unit blind. Always have a contingency in there to say, look, before we get to closing, I got to get in there and see what this unit looks like. You always need to know that. But you may only be in the unit for a minute. You just need to make sure it doesn't look like, you know, a bomb went off in there or something. So always very important. So that's the basics for doing a 2 to 4 unit. Those are the biggest tips I can give you. If you want to know more, I can give you good recommendations of people to talk to. There's people who specialize really in just doing 2 to 4 unit buildings. The same way you have people that specialize in condos and, you know, high-end houses or just regular houses or whatever. There's people that their whole business, all they do are these 2 to 4 unit buildings. It's really it's a great niche to get into and learn more about, and I can get you in contact with really good people for that. So it's a great avenue to go through. That's it for this video. Stick around. We're going to be starting multifamily in a minute, and I'll see you all very soon.